Welcome to Edmonds Election Watch 2015. I'm your host, Teresa Wippel. In the studio, we have Mike Nelson, who is running for election to Position 2 on the Edmonds City Council. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, first thing we always like to do is have folks tell us more about themselves, their background, how long they lived in Edmonds, and also why they're running for City Council. So go ahead.
Sure. My background, I moved to Edmonds with my family about 5 years ago. We have two young boys, and I first got involved in city government, if you will, through a piece of mail I got from the planning department, I believe it was, asking my opinion on what side of the street a sidewalk should be on. And I immediately replied in this big case of why it should be on this side, not the other side of the street. This had to do with funding they had gotten from the Safe Routes to Schools, and then I never heard anything. And though I was able to contact my council member, and immediately I got a response, and an engineer was going to come down and show me. They'd actually already made a decision. It wasn't what I recommended, and they were going to say where it was. They'd actually had a public hearing, but I never heard about it. And so all of that process, I was like, maybe I want to get a little bit more involved. And so I looked on the city website, and I found where the committees and boards were, and I looked up, and the Climate Protection Committee really jumped at me. And so I applied for that, and I was appointed to that. And then during my experience on the Climate Protection Committee, we got to work with the planning board to get our input on the sustainability element. And while I had some strong feelings about that, one of the planning board members said, well, hey, maybe you should apply for the planning board alternate position. So I applied for that and was on the planning board, primarily updating the comprehensive plan and the different elements of that. And it's been, that was a great experience. And then while I was on the planning board, an opportunity arose with the city council, and I applied for that appointment, and I was selected.
And the Climate Protection Committee is kind of an interesting one to choose because it must mean that you have some feelings about sustainability in the environment because you were drawn to that, right?
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was one of those things where, I love the outdoors. I love being in the outdoors. And I actually was in law school. I went to law school in Gonzaga, and I did an international environmental law class. And we actually I had to do a paper on any kind of subject, and I actually did, then it was called global warming. And so I remember researching, looking at Glacier National Park and seeing the images in the 1970s and then currently and seeing how the glaciers were evaporating. And I think to me, the part that really was the aha moment was when they were doing research in Antarctica with ice core samples, where they basically drill down into the ice, and then you can actually capture. You go back 10,000 years, and you can measure the amount of carbon dioxide, oxygen in that's trapped in that ice in that time. And so it was really apparent then, as people started driving, that the carbon dioxide levels started going up, and it's like, so that was a defining moment for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you see as the top 3 challenges facing Edmonds in the next 5 years?
Top 3. Well, I think for me, I'm looking at how can we strengthen our economy? How can we have a healthier environment and a safer community? And so I sort of look through things through those lenses. And so for our economy, to me, there's many ways that we can grow our economy. One of them is development. And specifically in an area, I think, where there's the most opportunities in Highway 99. So where we can, we recently got money from the state for $10 million to revitalize that area, to encourage more development, and to bring in potentially more mixed-use housing, more affordable housing, access to transit, potential new jobs. So to me, it's a one area that's just really, and we also have comparisons looking at shoreline, so we have models to look at to say, hey, this actually could be, and it's also, if you look at the amount of traffic that comes through there, it's the busiest single piece of roadway in our city. Mm-hmm. Second area is the safety of our community. So as a former deputy sheriff, public safety is really important to me. And I look at, the crime in our city, and it's not, you don't hear violent crime, it's not those kinds of things, but, it's quality of life. Mm-hmm. And you look at the major, they call it the modified crime index, and that's been going up for the last 5 years. Thefts are up highest the last 5 years, motor vehicle thefts, burglaries. So, and we also have one of the smallest police forces in any comparable size city. So for those reasons, we really think we need to, come budget time, how can we bring on some more officers to, work on that? Of course, with that, also we have fire and public safety, fire, medical aid response. And so to me, I want to make sure we can, we have really good response times, particularly with our station downtown, and whatever we can do to maintain that. People have a certain level of service they expect, and we want whatever I can do to help maintain that. Third, of course, is the environment, which I already sort of touched on. And to me, climate protection is something that's sort of, how do you grasp that? How do you, it seems something that's so vast. How do you do it? The climate's changing. And that's why I focused on two areas. The solar power, renewable energy, that's something everybody can potentially do and have a measurable impact. And recycling and reusing, that's another area.
Okay. One of the things that I've heard the mayor say and some others say is the concern that, right now our economy, our city economy is doing okay because of, some budget cuts that were made a few years ago. But the concern is that long-term, we're going to eventually be in the red and run out of money, and we have to start looking at some other options. Have you had a chance to think much about that yet? I mean, I know there's been some things that have been discussed in very general terms, but of course, there was a levy that, I think it was a transportation levy that was proposed a few years ago that was rejected by the voters to try to get some more money for roads and things like that. But are you at a point where you've had a chance to think much about what we might want to look at down the road?
Yeah, in fact, you actually mentioned transportation, and that's an area where we had a presentation about, the updating element, and we have a shortfall not only in the next 6 years, but in the next to 2035. Mm-hmm. And if I recall, in the next 6 years, we have a projected $44 million shortfall. So even with our general fund, even with federal and state grants, our real estate excise tax, our motor vehicle, gas tax, all those revenues, still we're short $44 million. Mm-hmm. And so how do we do it? As I understand, there was several different levies that were trying to go on before. So I think we need to decide if that's the route we want to go. If we want to do a levy, really focus on a levy on one area. So let's say transportation, and really, make the case to voters of why, if you really want to have roads and sidewalks, and you want those things to last because they're starting to fall apart because we don't have a lot of sidewalks, and accommodate the projected growth that we're going to have, something has to give. We don't have a line item in our budget right now for sidewalks. I'd love to have one, we should. Instead, we have to rely on federal and state grants for that. So some sort of way we can do that, that's definitely something. And then overall, how do we have, long-term financial planning? And I've already met with our finance director. I'm actually going to be meeting him once a month to kind of start to begin that process of, every time we come to a budget and we have all these wish lists of things like, let's enhance the police department. Okay, well, how do we do that sustainable for the next 6 years, for the next 10 years? Because that's going to be now a constant item on the budget, not a one-time thing.
Yeah. Okay. Let's turn to a few hot button issues that the council's been dealing with in recent months and see what your thinking is on them. The Sunset Walkway, obviously that's something that keeps coming up, and of course right now we're in a phase where we've got a temporary situation there with some paving and some markings and some diagonal parking that not everybody's, or angle parking that not everybody's happy with. And my understanding is that, there's going to be a report later on and some decisions made. There are some people who are not real happy about that. What is your thinking so far on Sunset?
So far, I've gone down there multiple times. I've driven down there. I've walked down there. Yeah, it was interesting. It was the angle parking. Originally I think that the city got a lot of response to, we should put angle parking because it will accommodate more cars. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, in practice, everybody, it's a nightmare. It's too packed. How do I get by? People are going slower. If you looked at the numbers of it, they actually are driving through there slower. But there's still more people going through there, and something over 1,000 people a day now are driving through there, which to me is astounding that we have 1,000 people a day driving through Sunset Avenue. And some are driving more the wrong way. But
that was, by the way, it's like, what was it, 12 a day or something that were driving the wrong way? How does that happen? That wasn't a question, by the way. That was just
I don't know. So I think, we need to have I think that, that may be something we need to rethink. The angle parking, does that really make sense? Clearly, folks are using it. They're out there walking every day. What we had before was a dirt path. I used to run on that dirt path. You know, it was a tiny little strip. I don't think that was safe. I'm not sure this is necessarily safe either. You're right there with cars. There's nothing that separates you and the cars. So I'm looking forward to seeing, with the surveys that, the Public Works is going to do and to get, once we have a year and all that data, look at it and see, does what we have make sense, or do we need to go with it? I'm open and I want to hear more. So I haven't really made a firm stance one way or the other on it.
Okay, very good. The other one that, of course, has been coming up a lot lately has been the playfields at the former Woodway High School, which is in your neck of the woods. You're in the Westgate area, right? And of course, folks parents and community members who've been concerned about the possible toxicity of the rubber tires that are there, and the city council has been looking at, kind of what the options are, and the school district has decided to move ahead with the fields. What is your, sense at this point about, I think we've all heard that the city might have some limited options on what they can do, but what's your feeling on this at this point?
As far as how I feel about crumb rubber or the process?
Yeah,
or?
the process. Just basically you have a group
Yeah.
of citizens who don't feel like
Yeah.
they were treated well, mostly by the school district.
Right,
But then they
right.
came to the city thinking that maybe there was something that could be
Yeah.
done.
I think at its core, I think people get into public service because they want to help.
Right, exactly.
And so when this came before us, it was through a quasi-judicial hearing, and we were very limited in the scope that we could review. And so that process, all I can remember doing was, I can't help.
Right.
I can make a ruling almost like a judge on a very limited set of evidence that we were allowed to view and only view, and make a decision based on that, which I did. But then immediately afterwards, I didn't feel good about it. I felt this is, there's more to this, and I want to learn more. And so, in addition to obviously hearing all the public testimony, and the school and the various reports from toxicologists, I did my own research on it, and as the more I researched it, the more questions I had, and the more I wanted to take a pause. I wanted to say, this doesn't, there's more to it here. And as a parent, I'm worried. I'm worried that not that it's going to get somebody sick tomorrow, but that it might get somebody sick 10 years from now. And so to me, I understand the school district made their decision. I understand we were going to partner with them with this interlocal agreement, but the facts have changed, when this was first drafted. And so I personally can't support this local agreement without there being an alternative infill. I think everybody agrees we should have synthetic fields. The question, of course, is the type of infill in there, and I think there potentially is safer alternatives, and I'd like to explore those. I want to be a partner with the school district. I want to look forward to being a partner in other areas and in other fields, but this is one where I think we need to take a break and really examine it a little bit more and ask a little more tougher questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's an interesting take, because I know there have been some council members who've kind of come down on different sides
Sure.
of it, and, well, the vote, of course, by the time this airs, the vote probably will have been taken.
And it probably will.
But in any case, thank you very much for answering that. One of the things that has come up specifically related to you is, and you didn't talk about this in the opening part, I didn't ask you specifically, but you are executive director of which organization?
Service Employees
Right, that's
International
right.
Union,
Yeah,
Washington State
that's
Council.
right. Well, the reason why I couldn't remember it is it's so long.
It is a lot.
And there have been some discussions about how because that's a union-type position, when votes come up in council meetings or executive discussions or happen where it's labor negotiations, which are a fair amount of things that council
Sure.
members deal with.
Sure.
There's been some concern that perhaps that makes it difficult when you either have to recuse yourself because it's a union issue that you might directly be involved in, or maybe even if you don't recuse yourself, somehow there's some tainting of the process because of that. I'm sure you've heard that criticism. What would you say to people who think that's an issue?
Well, when I first came on, in fact, that was one of the issues that I met with the city attorney about. And he looked into whether or not there was any sort of financial conflict of interest, and there wasn't, and he has felt strongly about that. However, to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest, when we had attended our first executive session and a contract negotiations came up with a particular local union, I recused myself. And, it comes up every 3 years or so, and I will continue to recuse myself on that matter. But as far as other labor negotiations go or other unions, what I can say to that is, we all come in with particular biases, backgrounds, experiences. We have council members who are business people. Does that mean that every time there's something that's going to help a business or improve a business district that they need to recuse themselves? I mean, at some point you have to draw a line. Mm-hmm. And I try to be as objective as I can, but sure, I bring biases as a parent. I bring a bias as an outdoorsman, as somebody who has a law degree, as somebody who's a deputy sheriff, as somebody who fights for working people everywhere. So, and I bring a bias as my dad, who was a small business owner and who was constantly complaining about how many taxes he had to pay. So, I try to bring a open open mind to everything I do.
Okay. And speaking of executive sessions, another thing that some have asked about is the fact that, at least from their perspective, it seems like there are a lot of them, and that perhaps that does make city government maybe not as transparent as it could be or should be. I know you haven't been on the council very long, but do you have any feelings about that at this point?
Well, I know that there are not many councils that do this that have actual, notes that are taken. And so people can, and once, the idea behind them, of course, is any sort of pending litigation or litigation the city's involved in, that we have these discussions. And I understand it simply because if we can't talk frankly with our attorney, and the attorney can't talk to the city as a client about, strategy without the other side knowing, going to a courtroom, you're at an inherent disadvantage. The city is an inherent disadvantage. So there needs to be some sort of place to have that. Because the discussions do become public at some point, I think people can see for themselves what's discussed. And when we have had discussions that have trailed off there, our council members will say, hey, you know what, this is something that should be taken outside in public, not here. And our notes usually reflect that. So I think because we have notes process. But yeah, I would love I would love us not to be in litigation. I would love us not to have executive sessions. I would love to have everything out there. But it does put the city in a financial and in a legal risk. And I don't know how to overcome that.
Okay. One last question related to Westgate. And again, you were not on the council when the Westgate vote was taken, or you were?
I was.
For the Westgate zoning, that's right, you were. How time flies. My question is, that also had some controversy associated with it. There were folks who, especially people who live in Westgate, some worry about the zoning that will eventually change some of the dynamics of the area by allowing for some multi-story mixed-use housing and all of that. Obviously, you, as a Westgate resident, you must not have been too concerned about the traffic impacts and everything else that might be coming as a result of that. Kind of what was your thinking about supporting that?
Sure. Again, I looked at it. I looked at the proposal. I looked at, how did we get to this point? I looked at sort of the pros and cons. I literally wrote down a list. And I looked at, there's an opportunity for, more housing for folks who don't normally have that option. Greener buildings, wider sidewalks, and, a potential, actually enhancement of some of the traffic movement in there. So how the flow of traffic, that could be potentially rearranged. And I also looked at the fact that right now, traffic is a zoo already, and it isn't safe for pedestrians. It isn't safe when you cross, who would want to cross at that intersection with SR 104? But if it can encourage folks to also have transit access and encourage folks to live where they shop and be able to use other forms of transportation, and to me, it looked like a unique opportunity to do it. And so, but I walked around, and that's why I actually put forward an amendment limiting the heights of one of those sections, because I looked at it and I said 4 stories is just too much. It's going to be right next to the cemetery. It's going to take away all that natural light that we have coming in, and so I put a limit on that, and that was passed unanimously.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you would like to mention?
Is there anything, oh boy, I'm sure I could talk for hours.
Right. Some issue that you've been dying to discuss that we didn't talk about.
I think, I think trying to get more public involvement, we have it in, I guess, depending on the issue, so I think like an area like Marina Beach Park, the redevelopment of that and the Dayland of Willow Creek, I attended one of those open public meetings, those hearings, and it was great to see how much people came in and the involvement and how they shape things. And it's just, that part is so rewarding, and I think the more that we as a city and in city government can have those opportunities, encourage people to do that, and I think that particularly like with the alternative railroad, crossing, as being on this task force for the mayor, that I'm looking forward to having some of those, open hearings where we can have public input and hearing from public on that. And I think that's a matter that you will, in the next 14, 18 months, that we're going to have a lot of hopeful input on.
Okay, great. Well, now here's an opportunity for you to speak directly to the voters and tell them why they should vote for you, and so you're welcome to do that.
Thank you. I would love to have your vote, your support. This is a job that I have tried to do my best and take very seriously. I bring a different generational perspective. I bring a level-headedness. I try to listen to everything, do my homework, and really, I have your back, and I hope you can vote for me and support me in this election. Thank you.
Mike Nelson, thank you so much for coming on to talk with us today, running for City Council Position 2, and I wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
Thank you so much, Teresa.
Thank you.